All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dash. I'm a bookseller at Women and Children First in Chicago, and we are so excited to celebrate the release of Who is Wellness For by Fariha Róisín, who will be joined in conversation today by Mimi Zhu. And I want to welcome everyone for what I think will be a really great discussion. First, I'd like to begin our virtual event as we begin our events in store with a land acknowledgement. Please join me in acknowledging that the land on which the bookstore stands is the unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. There are over 75,000 Indigenous people living in Illinois, and we strive to recognize and honor Native history, literature, and community. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you're viewing tonight's event. We also strive to go beyond the words to the work by uplifting grassroots Native movements. We encourage everyone to research their local Indigenous-led land-back organizations. For us here in Chicago, we support the ongoing projects undertaken by the American Indian Center of Chicago. If you're in Chicago, our bookstore is reopened at this time. We're open for browsing Tuesday through Sunday, 11 to 6, and we also offer curbside pickup. And we also ship, so anyone anywhere in the U.S. can order from us at womenandchildrenfirst.com. And you can find out more about our future events from our website as well. And then before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping notes. If you'd like to ask either author a question at any time, make sure you use the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen rather than typing it in the chat. That just makes it a lot easier to find the questions when it comes time for the Q&A. And if you're interested in purchasing Who is Wellness For from Women and Children First, you can use the Buy the Book button at the bottom of the screen there. I highly recommend buying and reading it if you haven't already. And then lastly, if you're having any technical issues, we always recommend refreshing, thank you, Mimi, refreshing your browser. And also the recommended browser is Chrome. So that'll also help things. And then without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests for the night. Fariha Róisín is a multidisciplinary artist, and as a Muslim queer Bangladeshi, she's interested in the margins, liminality, otherness, and the mercurial nature of being. Her work has pioneered a refreshing and renewed conversation about wellness, contemporary Islam, and queer identities, and has been featured in the New York Times, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, and Vogue. She is the author of the poetry collection How to Cure Ghosts, as well as the novel Like a Bird, which I will link in our chat. Mimi Zhu is a queer Chinese-Australian writer and artist. They explore the many intersections of love and fear, and they facilitate workshops that are dedicated to the healing power of the written word. Their work has been featured in the New York Times, Paper, ID, The Guardian, Printed Matter, Vice, and more. And their debut book, Be Not Afraid of Love, is coming August 2022. Congrats. Super exciting. Thank you, Fariha and Mimi, for being here. And I will let you take it away.
Hi, my love.
Hi, Fa. It's so good to see you in the virtual world.
It's telling that, like, as we started our conversation, there was an ambulance that went by.
I know.
So apt.
Yeah. We were talking obviously before this, and I feel like the main thing that I said is that this conversation is going to get real, and so let's get real. And this is not separate or foreign to us because Fariha and I have a very close relationship where we talk about this stuff all the time. So everybody tuning in is so welcome to be a part of that. And like, thank you everyone for being here. Buy Fariha's book. Okay. So I'm going to start by asking some questions. And I just wanted to check in with you first. Like, how are you today?
I'm good. I am settling back into LA, which is where I live now. I don't like traveling, I guess. I mean, I do in theory, like I love it. And then the destabilization that I feel inevitably when I'm away from home and when I'm like in that liminal space of being in the air and then being on the ground somewhere else. So yeah, I heard a couple of months ago that really emotional people or sensitive people are sensitive to travel, and that I think exposed a part of myself I'd never really understood. And so, yeah, right now I'm finding stability. How are you?
I am doing really well. I'm by the ocean right now. And I think it's really interesting that you say that, because I've had such a destabilizing time, I think, the past few weeks, and also prepping for my book and kind of having a peek at what you've been going through for the last few months, actually the last few years, and all the books that you've been dropping, right? It's like really an intense process. So
Yeah.
being by the ocean today, I'm like very, very happy about it. And so really today, obviously I want to talk about who is wellness for, but I really want to focus on your wellness specifically and how you're doing and how you're feeling, now that the book is out and that it's such like an intense process for you, right? Because this book, I would argue, is your most personal book out of all the ones that I've read, out of all the ones that are out. And I wanted to ask you how you've moved with self-compassion and honesty throughout this time.
Whoa. Okay, let's go big. Self-compassion and honesty. Is that what you said?
Yeah, because I know that writing a book, especially one that talks about your own experiences, which we'll get into, with such honesty, requires a lot of self-compassion, because the truth is not always pretty or beautiful. And I wanted to ask how you're moving through that compassion right now.
That's such a good question, and it's so complicated. Compassion, I think just like the sheer gratitude that I have that I get to write, and that I have an audience, that there are people that actually are invested in reading my work and are interested in the ways in which I have to articulate things and the way in which I process life. It's such a gift. It's such a gift to have people that are on that walk with you. And so I think that I've garnered a lot of compassion for myself by accepting that I'm fulfilling my life's purpose, that I'm committed to the journey of being a writer and the act of being a writer. And that's not glamorous most of the time. It's actually the antithesis. Like the kind of writing that I want to do is so penetrating of this, like of one's soul, my soul. I'm like going in there and excavating like everything. And I'm so primed to do that work. And that in itself is a miracle, because like people ask me like, how do you do it? How can you do it? I think that there isn't a lot of concern about the psychological impacts it has on me, because I'm really together for the most part, I would say. And I think being one of my closest friends, you would probably attest to that. And yet, like even though I'm together and that's not a performance, like the act of it is so painful, and it's still like, it's also a relief. There's so much catharsis in the excavation. So I think like the fact that I've been primed to do this work by spirit, by God, by chance, by ancestry, or whatever it is that's like put me on this earth, that in itself is like, wow, I feel very blessed. And so I think compassion comes from that I'm, just sort of like, even when I feel low or I feel like I'm not achieving enough, I'm Capricorn. So like, obviously I'm constantly thinking, you're not enough, or like, that's not enough. And this invisible mountain that I'm climbing. And I think just like my natural propensity for like evolution, like all of that is just so amazing to sort of self-witness. And I'm gaining a lot of compassion for that work that I'm doing.
I'm really proud of you, honestly. Like, I think Capricorns in general might have a hard time in being self-compassionate, but I think you've become, like, you're so committed, and I've known you for such a long time, and your dedication, your like deep dedication to this work is very evident for the people who have been reading and witnessing your growth as an author, as a writer, as a person. And as a friend, personally, I think this is the book where you're just like, I don't know, this is a moment for you. Or I think it's an extended period of time where this commitment has like locked in for you. And you're just like, okay, this is what I meant to do, right? And you're talking about wellness because that's been your journey. And I think you're putting so many names to it finally, and you're actually saying like, yeah, like I experienced this and I'm going to be kind to myself as I tell this story. Which, that excavation, it's not easy at all, but watching you do it gives me the bravery as a writer to do it myself. So I really thank you. It's amazing.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you.
And I think also you wrote about this in your book as well, in the first chapter on the mind. And I know you talk about your like mental illness and your relationship with it and your family's relationship with it, right? And I think, and we've talked about this too privately, but as you're writing this book, you're obviously talking about some like pretty intense things that have happened to you, intense things that you have survived. How did you make sure that you were writing it for yourself without pleasing other people constantly? Because you mentioned something about people pleasing, and pleasing is a trauma response. And so how did you kind of navigate that and not people please throughout the pages, but write for yourself?
Thankfully, I don't write as a people pleaser. It's like the only place. I think it's the Mars in Sagittarius. It's like I don't write for anyone's approval, and I never have. And thankfully, I've been sort of like protected from that, and I've never had to fall into it. I think that's probably why, like, my career, it's so like lopsided in so many ways, because like I'm taking risks wherever I go. I've always taken risks. And I forgot your question. Sorry, babe. I was going somewhere and then I forgot your actual question.
Well, I mean, you honestly did kind of answer it, because when I was talking about people pleasing as a trauma response,
people pleasing. Yeah.
How to not do that in your book. You saying that you don't as a writer, I think shows how writing is a safe space for you, right? You don't really have to answer to anybody, and you can just like write freely and feel free in that.
Yeah, because, and I think everyone has to write like that. I think that like inevitably people are going to be angry at you. I mean, this book is going to make a lot of people angry, like across the board. And I'm sort of looking forward to not it coming toward me, but like that conversation and like what's going to happen when people are probed to a challenging place. And I actually really enjoy the fact that my work is very challenging, and it's always consistently been challenging because I challenge authority. And authority is many different things. Authority has many different arms, and authority looks like many different things. It has many different faces. So, it's this like weird saving grace where like in my work, I've never had to be afraid And I think that's really, evident in the work, hopefully.
Yeah. It's really interesting too that you say that, because I think it's like a fine line, right? When it comes to writing about, like you're writing and it's going to be out there and people are going to respond, people are going to get angry, etc. But I guess, like, how has the response been and how have you navigated that? Because as far as I'm concerned, I know a lot of people who love it and think it's very, very important work. And because you say things that I think people are nervous to say out loud, you say what people might even deem unsayable. I think your work is very ahead of our time, right? Well, at the same time, you're also doing something ancient. Like, you're doing something ancestral. So you're doing something like in the future while accessing the past constantly, right?
And what is sourcing Indigenous knowledge but that? Like, I think what's so profound about our ancestries, our separate ancestries, but also, like, the lands that we come from, China, Bangladesh, India, these are lands with such profound and holistic civilizations that have been around for a millennia. And the wisdom that has been trapped more in India and South Asia, I think there's a lot of trapped knowledge, and like colonization was so specific to that land that it really demonized and demolished indigeneity completely. And the more I've unearthed that in my own life, and the more that I've sort of been able to track an ancestry that I don't actually have a lot of access to, beginning to understand where my people come from and how, like, Indian Vedic scholars were thinking about meditation 15,000 years ago in a cave. Like, are you at what? And like, just sort of seeing the ways that the East has always prioritized spirit and God in a way that's so integral and part of like natural living. Just engaging with the earth is like engaging with science. Like, Muslims very much braided that into sort of Muslim civilizations, and like this understanding that health, wellness was as important as, mathematics, and everything was a part of this sort of holistic life. And they knew beyond what we know now in so many ways, and where our responsibility is to excavate that knowledge as well. And the more we tap into it, it is like future building. But it's that like amazing like 7 generations concept of like, if you're healing yourself, you're healing not only 7 generations behind you, but also 7 generations ahead of you. This is really profound.
That is really profound. And it's like the work is simultaneous, right? Like, it's not a binary of past and future. It's like an ongoing loop and a feedback cycle that I think constantly just talks to each other. And I learned so much in your book about specifically South Asian meditation practices, because that's constantly erased, like constantly. And I can hear your frustrations, and I can see how, like, I can only imagine how irritated it must feel to be like a South Asian Muslim femme person who's just constantly seeing not only you but your ancestors be erased. And so I feel like this book is such a beautiful commemoration that's going to have a life for a very, very, very long time, and that a lot of people are going to learn from. So yeah, I love it so much. And I guess just going back to your personal experiences, right? So as you connect with your ancestors, I think some people think that ancestors are maybe just people that you're related to. I personally don't think that way, but kind of going to the ancestors that you are biologically related to, did you feel like you connected with them as you were doing research?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I found out like some really weird stuff, like even about my mother's father, so my grandfather, he was a very, very incredible man and a socialist and a member of parliament in Pakistan and then Bangladesh later after the Liberation War. And he was just, sort of like a huge role model for, I guess, the kind of person that I am. And when I was younger, I was always told that I might be the one to carry his legacy. And I dropped out of law school, and so that didn't happen. And then while I was writing this book, really early this year or late last year, actually, I had a really intense experience with a transgenerational healer. And she was like, you are your grandfather's legacy. Like, she read my cards and she was like, you're fulfilling him, you're his twin, and your mother was his twin too, and she couldn't do it. And there's so much, like grief there, but you're the one that's doing the work. And this was a man who came from a wealthy family, and because of his socialist beliefs, he gave all of his land away, and didn't ever pursue wealth. And that was carried on to my father, even though he wasn't his son. And then that was very much carried on to me in the way that I was raised, and sort of this deep sense of responsibility to others always. A real sense of service that's like laced in my blood. And it just was really encouraging and moving to realize that, like, I know that he wasn't perfect. He was a patriarch. And, there's I think, hagiography that we have of men in our family sometimes. And I don't want to participate in that. But I also think that he was an extraordinary person in many ways. And it's nice to know that I'm carrying his legacy, and that the work that he did so tirelessly, and like what I saw him do, like how he was really invested in fairness and goodness, and that integrity that you and I have talked about, like this obsession with integrity and like and fairness. Like, I know what is fair. I've always had a really strong sense of fairness. And I've always given more. And I think like being able to sort of like understand him, and like understand that I'm sort of like, and even the things of like gender queerness, and like how you and I have always talked about just like being non-binary and what that means. And like, I don't talk about it publicly, but it's a very private experience for me. And I've always felt very masculine, and it really made sense, like that I was like embodying my grandfather, and like just the ways in which like I could like channel him, and like I could channel like what authority and like fairness and understand what a boundary is for the first time. I think he really helped me. He was so poised and so extraordinary, and I think like had anger and could utilize it in a way that was so like profound, because he was always doing it for good. And those are all things that I really, really like held on to. And I think just sort of the Marxist socialist lineage that I come from, and sort of that like deep kind of service, like it's and to my detriment too, obviously, because I suffer so much from like the responsibility of always being perfect, and like I love indulgence, all of the other things that you and I talk about. I love pleasure, I love beautiful things. So like I think I'm healing that part of my family too, by like actually investing in beauty, and not just like being like, no, like this, you only are, you're all you're good for is to serve others. Like that actually is not healthy. It has to be a balance.
I think so much came up for me because you talked about how, your mother was supposed to do that work and you're doing it instead. And I think that's an overarching part of your book, right? Right. Where
Yeah.
mother was supposed to do so much of the work and instead the legacy of hurt was passed on to you.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why you've written this book, to like excavate that and heal that and work through that in ways that you couldn't, which is not easy work, but it's very, very admirable. And I think, to add to your relationship with your grandfather, or your twin kinship with your grandfather, it is beautiful to see you investing in pleasure, in the erotic, right? And I think we've talked about this before, especially in reference to Audre Lorde's work. It's like the erotic is so deeply important. And so I wanted to ask you about your pleasure and what that looks like to you and what that means to you and how you found that while writing this book as well.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, I end on pleasure, and I think the process of being celibate these last couple of years and really having to go into a part of myself that was, I guess trapped. Like, I spent a lot of my late teens and 20s throttling myself into sexual relationships that were unhealthy and painful and didn't serve me. But I thought that that's how you learned, and that's how I really wanted to like myself. So I was like, I just have to like sleep with a ton of people and like feel worthy or so, I don't know. There was a dance that I was doing in my head. And then I think when I started to have all of the kind of body memory return back about my childhood and the sexual violations that I experienced in my childhood, a lot of things began to make a lot of sense about like how I move and how I carry myself and how I react to certain things and why I react to certain things. And everything just sort of clarified. And within that experience, what became very profoundly clear was that I don't actually know what I like. I don't actually know what I want. And it took me many years to be in that, be in that safety, in that hermit phase of my life of just being very protective and uncomfortable and angry at people and not really sexual, not really wanting to explore that part of myself, very much cut off. And I needed that. I needed that sort of isolation. And I just thought of like nature again, how like a sense of hibernation is so integral to the process of nature. Like we have literally like, we have seasons for that reason, and like in indigenous teachings in North American indigenous teachings, this like understanding, or even in India, and I write this in the book too, like so much is split in Chinese medicine, so much is split within like elemental things, right? So we're like, there's fire, there's water, there's wind, there's earth, and simultaneously there's spring, there's summer, there's fall, there's winter. And every season is a part of the process of existing in evolution. And it's so necessary for us as people to have seasons of dying and death and rebirth, and then sowing and, sowing the field and letting the harvest bloom and blossom. Like all of that is a part of it. And I think that we're so removed from that process. And to me, what I really want for us is to sort of move back to this understanding of like, it's okay to be in dark times. It's okay to be isolated. It's okay to sort of like move through those things. And accept that as a part of the erotic, because life is so erotic, nature is so erotic, and it's erotic even in the danger and even in the sort of like death and reality of that. And like death is erotic, and sort of understanding that, because I'm like doing a lot of death work now, and accepting the eroticism of life, and really sort of responding to it from that perspective of like openness, and not just like, and I under a very sort of like, I guess, simplistic understanding of sexuality and sex, is just being sort of like penetration, or like, you know, two people do. It's so dumb. It's so like, and we don't know what intimacy is, and we don't know what like just the tangibility of life and the responsiveness of like creatures and beings and plants and trees, and the gushing sound of water across pebbles and creeks, and the ways in which like a butterfly like stroking your neck can like be orgasmic and profound. You know, it's like, it's really cool to come back to my body and actually start to understand the rivulets of my own body's compass, and just sort of like be really patient with whatever reveals itself. That's been really cool. I'm gonna get my charger. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna be moving.
Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay. I'll move too. I'll move with you. How about
yeah, let's dance together. Okay. I'm going into my bedroom.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what the erotic can be. And when I think about the erotic, especially in the ways that Audre Lorde talks about it, I think about the fullness of being and the fullness of life. And so you saying a butterfly grazing the neck as erotic, right? Watching the sunset as erotic, hearing the ocean as erotic. And I think your book really talks about all those very full erotic experiences that I think are deeply accessible in meditation, actually, kind of bringing it back to that. And I think pleasure is a very instinctual and intuitive thing, right? Because I would always be like, oh, what's erotic to me? Like, I don't know. And like you said, like I would go and have sex with a bunch of people, or like just try to like push myself in ways that I thought eroticism was, but I was actually very uncomfortable with, or I had not felt aligned with me deeply, but they were sold to me as ways to be erotic. And I realized that the fullness of an erotic experience or erotic moment is really just being completely immersed in it and seeing in my intuition, like, does this give me pleasure, right? Like, does this actually allow me to feel full and engaged with the moment? But what I kind of wanted to ask, and I was also reading your chapter on intuition again today, because that's one of my favorites. I think like intuition, I have a hard time sometimes distinguishing it from anxiety, right? Like I think that sometimes my intuition is me. Like I'm like, oh, am I actually being intuitive, or am I just being like, just overthinking something, right? What you have in the front of your mind. So I wanted to ask you about the difference in that, or how you access your intuition, how you just know, like when you know, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think they teach this, and this has been really helpful for me. I mean, they teach this. It's like, I guess, like part of even shamanic practice, an understanding that intuition is something that is like very slow. Your body like sort of just like processes it, and it feels like a download, and you don't really understand it, but it doesn't feel reactive. Whereas anxiety feels reactive, and it's a nervous system thing. However, intuition is just like a knowing feeling, and no desire to kind of like change or shift anything. It's just like purely like it's purely like it's still, there's something still about it.
I'm going to think about that for the rest of my life, genuinely, because it sounds like intuition is embodied, right?
Yes.
And anxiety is up here.
Yeah.
Because the reason I confuse it is because that voice up here is so strong, right? It's like, for example, and I'm just going to use this as a very loose example. If I go on a date with someone, right, and I can't access my intuition, my head will be like, don't do it, Mimi, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And I'll be like, is that my gut or is that my head? Is that my fear or is that my embodied knowing? And I think that's when I get confused. But you kind of saying that it's a very slow feeling, like a slow download, is something that is very, very helpful for me.
Yeah. And there's no desire. I think this is the most important part, to change something, or just it's just a knowing feeling. And I think the more that we trust that, obviously, the more that we can be superhuman.
Wow. So what do you desire?
The
book, with
what do I desire?
Everything, yeah.
With my work?
With your life.
Not my life?
Yeah.
With my work, I desire evolution and a deep desire to connect with people, to have true connection with humans, to help change and shift society toward the direction that we need to go collectively, to be an empowering person in people's lives, to be a part of the community, to be a member of the community, and to be invested in the growth of a globalized society that privileges everyone and works towards equality and fairness and truth. And in my life, I want radical honesty. I want deep love. I want true and faithful companionship in every way. To be held, to be known. The wind is so loud, babe.
It is?
Yeah.
Let me mute myself. So sorry.
No, it's okay. It's so beautiful. Now I'm just silent with myself. It's so wild. I want my dreams to come true. I want to be happy. I want to embody. And I want people to believe in healing and help guide the way in whatever way I can towards that for others. I think we downplay how important and accessible true healing is, because it's only marketed towards the rich. But actually, it's accessible to all of us, and it requires a lot of facing yourself and the excavation that I was talking about. But I want to show that it's worth it. And I think the book really contends with that. The book really sort of faces that and very much, I hope, is a mirror of what's possible.
I think you saying that healing is not, it's not perfect, it's not pretty, it's not beautiful necessarily, kind of links to you even saying, like, just now where you said death is erotic, right? And kind of zooming out on that, I want to ask you about your work with death as a budding death doula and how that's connecting. Also, I'm so sorry if the wind is really loud.
I love it. Yeah,
And
she's speaking to.
It's a new moon, so I really
Yeah,
want you to talk about your desires out loud.
Cancer.
Yeah, and it's like really, really deep. And I think at least what Cancer encourages me to do is to sit with the ugly, if I'm being so honest. Like, I think people are scared during this time. People like, oh, it's Cancer season, like take me back to Gemini season. And as a Gemini, I rebuke that. Like, I want to
Yeah.
feel
Yes. Yes.
And so I guess I'm asking you, like, how do you face death and all of its fullness? Big one. Sorry.
No, I love it, obviously. Wow. Wow, the stillness. I've always, I guess, been pretty obsessed with death. The first time I really understood it, I was 10 years old, and it's because somebody told me who Nostradamus was. Nostradamus, who he was, and how he had predicted, certain things about the world. And I was like, well, he's dead. He died. That was a man many years ago. And that was the first time that I was just like, what? This is so, I'm going to die. And then I think after that, and really, I think a reaction to my abuse and the continuation of my abuse, because it was like sexual, and then it was also just like, it was everyday abuse. It was abuse in the household, and a lot of control. So I think to manage that, I became quite suicidal and emo as a child. I was diagnosed quite young. And then my IBS started when I was 14. So a lot of my life until from understanding death then started to deteriorate. And I was kind of always on the precipice of death. I think having a chronic illness makes you feel like you're always dying because your body is never well or normal. So you're just constantly grappling with your mortality. And it wasn't until I was about 27, I think, that I met someone. One of my former partner's close friends was studying to be a death doula. And this also just I think having a sister that was very much in the alternative world. So was teaching me a lot about Buddhism and Reiki and was the person who introduced me to auras. I had that kind of sister. And so she was giving me a lot of books to read. And I remember, I can't remember what it's called now. I think Falling in Leaves or something. And it's about this man's experience with a terminal illness. So I feel a lot of, my life was a sort of navigating around death. And then I had this conversation with this person, and there was such a sense of relief of hearing about the work. And it kind of, I guess, simultaneously went with only a couple of months later, I guess, or maybe a year later, I sat with ayahuasca for the first time, grandmother. And, in indigenous languaging, they refer to her as grandmother, and also the vine of death. I think ayahuasca means the vine of death. And that's because she kills you in a lot of ways. If you allow her to, she really wants to for your own good. And the act of that kind of absolution, I guess, because I think facing yourself is an act of absolution. It's sort of like the most, and that's why I obviously love Cancer season. It's just like my moon's there, my rising's there, like my Chiron's there, my Jupiter's there. It's just like I find so much safety in the darkness and in the facing of the darkness, not being in the darkness, but facing it. And I think because I do have this elasticity of like, I'm actually really strange and funny, and I love comedy, and I'm very much obsessed with joy and tending to joy and like tending to humor, and I'm very light. I think that's why I can go to these very dark places, and I can contend with death and understand it beyond just like an ending. I see and want to face the kind of elasticity in death and like what it can propel you into. Yeah, I mean, I was faced, you know, I think having a parent that just had a very, very crippling mental illness, and it had very monstrous, I guess, put us in a lot of monstrous circumstances. Yeah, like wanting to live my life to the fullest and to find reprieve has become a very important self journey. And weirdly, the more I face death, the more I feel alive. I mean, not so weirdly, that's what every esoteric, you know, conversation tells you, but it's true. It's like just fully accepting, and obviously like it's such a long journey. It's my life's work, this kind of work. But I think really, really tending to those places has helped me understand that this is the work of my life. You know, that like so much of my professional work is my personal work, and they go hand in hand, and they're both saying the same thing. I'm just working through these things in order to, I guess, write them and write about them. And yeah, I'm very scared of dying. So I need to understand how to accept it and embrace it and contend with the beauty of what it's here. It is our ultimate teacher, I think.
Whew, that's so incredible. I mean, you talking about your grandfather and your link to him, and then your grandmother, right? Your grandmother ayahuasca, and your link with this sacred plant who has taught you about death, but also about continuation. And it's okay. Obviously, like, death is scary, but what you just said about death, or like facing death, allowing you to feel more alive, like, come on. A writer, a poet, a prophet, you know. And even though, sure, that has been said in a lot of esoteric stories over history, we always forget it. Like,
Yeah.
it's always forgotten truth, because there's so many things that are designed to distract us from life, from living it, from living with people, from living it in solidarity, in togetherness, in mutual aid, and these things, like trying to make us forget and sever our ties to each other. And I think your book is so beautiful as it ends on pleasure, because it connects all these weaving parts that really, at the end of the day, just bring us back to death, which brings us back to life, you know. And I'm so grateful for you deeply. And I hope everybody, please buy this book. Please support Fariha, because, you know, as Fariha and I have also talked about in our personal lives, like, being socialists is difficult in like a very, you know, in late stage capitalism. It's not an easy thing, but I think supporting each other and supporting her work is pivotal. So you can keep doing this work and do what you are meant to do and do what you're so good at and so generous with. So thank you deeply.
Thank you, darling.
Yeah.
This is a great conversation.
I know, and it's one of our many. Like, me and Fariha meet up and talk for 6 hours. It's just like a thing that we do. I think it's question time, but I just wanted to begin. Yeah.
I don't know if we have any questions.
If anybody wanted to drop in the chat any questions, anything they wanted to ask Fariha about this book and how it came to be.
The wind, the majestic wind.
Can you hear me? Like, has it been a problem?
It's been loud, but it hasn't been. I've loved it. I loved it. I loved the sound.
I want to show you this. I want to show everyone the sunset.
Yes. Oh my God. Are you kidding me? This is what you're seeing? This is a dream.
And it was so beautiful to be able to talk to you.
What a perfect partner to our conversation. Mother Earth, the sunset. Should we just continue? What do you want to do? Thanks, Meg. Thanks for being here.
Yes. We can continue. I'd love to. But if anybody has any questions, just feel free to drop it in the chat because we would love to interact and connect with you all. I think maybe, I think just, I know we're touching a lot of different themes and different parts of the book, but again, I think that's why this book is so beautiful and vital and important, because it really is such an overarching story about you. And again, like, I feel like this is, in your work, and obviously I read everything you write, but this is a time when you have talked so personally from the I. And I wanted to ask, over the scope of like the range of your work, why did you want to focus on the I this time?
I think it was just the first opportunity that made sense, like a bird and How to Cure a Ghost felt like they were being ejected from me. Like I needed to put them out. And Who Is Wellness For is very much a in process where I'm at. That's why it feels so honest, because it's such a, I think, 1-for-1 representation of exactly where I'm at. And that requires the vulnerability of an I. And I think also I felt as if this argument within Who Was Wellness For, which is like a large, just sort of like anti-capitalist argument, and really, I think also an argument for better connection with each other, and an argument for us being more connected to ourselves and the earth. And so I felt like that it would mean more, or it would be more affecting if I also told my story, and if I also weaved it into my own experience of needing wellness and needing it as a survival, as an aspect of my own survival, because I don't really know what I would have done if I hadn't have found these alternative ways of healing young. I think I probably would have died. And that's I think, a sort of like very silent observation that I have throughout the book. Kind of just like, I say this a lot in my work, but yeah, I've sort of always been close to death in that sense. And when you're raised with such abuse and like such total abuse, then like your life never feels like your own. And I needed to sort of like talk about that hopelessness and helplessness that I grew up with. And I think just in therapy and doing a lot of that trauma work with my therapist, doing EMDR, doing, death work, doing ayahuasca, all of these methodologies has allowed me to realize and understand that a lot of people have language for doing the work. Everyone seems to have the language now. It's so popularized. Everybody reads Instagram infographics, I guess, like all of the, like, this is what you do, and like TikToks or whatever. But doing the work is somatic, and you can sense it in someone's somatic existence in the world and how they make others feel and how they navigate themselves and how they navigate their friends and the people in their life. And when you're not showing up for those people and you're not understanding how we're all in this together and nobody's needs are more important than another's, I wanted to sort of show all of that wisdom through the eye. And that's why I felt it really important for me to kind of like show it from my own perspective and talk about how I'm complicit and implicated in this conversation as well. And how I'm also, as much as I am like also a person who needs wellness, I'm also complicit in the fact that like I'm complicit. We all are in capitalism, and there's so much to learn, and there's so many ways that we can grow and evolve, and that's so exciting to me. I don't feel overwhelmed by the work. I feel very humbled by it. Yeah.
I'm so happy to hear that, because speaking from the eye, I feel like puts a lot of weight on the eye, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think seeing you and watching you know how worthy this eye of you is of that wellness and is of that pleasure and is of that eroticism. And you talk about this as well, about how the West has like this intense fixation on the individual self.
Mm-hmm.
But when I say you're speaking from the eye, you're speaking about the eye who's connected to every other
Totally.
eye. You're talking about how you're connected to every plant, every like consciousness, and every like living person in the world. And I find that really, really beautiful and really special. And I'm going to ask you a question that I feel like I already know the answer to, but I wanted you to elaborate on.
Mm-hmm.
But as a survivor, are there things that you know that you wish you didn't know?
Whoa.
Big one.
I mean, that was really painful while I was writing the book. That reality was really painful. The reality of my life. And like, those were the parts that I was like, I'm like, how did I survive this? And it was like the first time I really had to face that outside of therapy. I had to really face the fact that I survived a lot. I'm going to say I don't mind, or there's nothing that I wish I didn't know, but I don't think that that's like also fair, because the body memory is really strong. And when you're a child sexual abuse survivor, you don't want to remember those things. So those kinds of things are really hard. And at the same time, I think where I am with the chronic pain and the chronic work that I have to deal with, and sort of the denial of my IBS, and like pretending, and I guess like also just like not talking about how much care I need, and how much like care even like within like what I eat. Like that's the kind of basic care I need. And like how I've just hidden all of these needs from so many of the people in my life. It's like why I cook so much, because I get to buy all the organic ingredients. I get to like do I don't want to put that labor on anybody else. Like I have to eat at such a high standard. I mean, we've talked about this too, because if I eat other stuff, I will get sick. And so, yeah, I never like explaining those things to people, just sort of like doing what I got to do. And people just thinking like, whoa, okay, like I'm privileged because I eat only organic food, for example, not understanding like, why am I eating it? So yeah, it's like, there's a lot of hardship in the journey, but I think I just accept these days everything. And I've surrendered completely. And even when it's hard, and it is many times a week, a day, I just have to move with the assurance that this is a phenomenal part of my teaching on this earth. And if I have to look at the wound, which I think is very much Venus and Aquarius and North Node and Aquarius in the 8th house, I just have to look at the wound and just completely release whatever is holding on. I think that is my work in this lifetime.
And I want you to remember that you never deserve to have that wound, but you deserve to receive all the love.
Thanks. Thank you. I love you.
Sorry. I was going to say that was a very beautiful note to end on, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to thank you again, Fariha and Mimi, for being here tonight. That was a beautiful conversation. Y'all are so thoughtful in your questions and responses, and that was really refreshing. So I loved listening. And then once again, I just want to remind everyone that you can purchase Who is Wellness For using the Buy the Book button at the bottom of the screen. Buy the book. And afterwards, you can always purchase from womenandchildrenfirst.com as well.
Yes.
And then also just a reminder, this video was recorded, so everyone who's registered will get a link to that via email. That should come in tomorrow. And yeah, thank you again to our guests and to everyone for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. This was a beautiful event. Appreciate both of you.
Okay, bye.
Bye,
everyone.